Northern France, the autumn of 1415. On a narrow field of churned mud, between two dark woods, a small English army stands cold, hungry, and sick. Across from them waits the greatest army France can summon, the flower of its knighthood, thousands strong and certain of victory. By the end of this day, that mighty French army will be destroyed. This is the Battle of Agincourt. It is one of the most famous victories in English history, and one of the most misunderstood. The story we are usually told is simple, that English archers and their longbows cut down the French. The truth is stranger, and it begins not with arrows, but with mud, hunger, and a desperate gamble. To understand that muddy field, we have to go back. For most of a century, the kings of England had claimed the throne of France, and the two kingdoms had bled each other in a long, grinding conflict later called the 100 Years' War. In the year 1415, a young and ambitious king, Henry V of England, revived that claim and sailed for France to take by force what talking had failed to win. His first target was the port town of Harfleur, and Henry expected a quick and easy conquest. Instead, the town held out for more than a month behind its walls, and the siege devoured his time, his supplies, and his men. Worse than any French sword was the sickness that swept the English camp, a wasting dysentery that killed and crippled soldiers by the thousand. By the time Harfleur fell, Henry's army was a shadow of the force that had landed, and many counseled him to simply sail home. Instead, he made a bold and dangerous choice. He would march his exhausted men across northern France to the English-held port of Calais, about 150 miles through hostile country, as a show of defiance. It was a decision that would very nearly destroy him. The French were waiting. As Henry marched, a great French army shadowed and outpaced him, blocking the rivers and the roads ahead. Finally, near a small village called Agincourt, the English found their path north sealed shut. A French host far larger than their own stood squarely across the only road home. There would be no avoiding battle now. The night before the battle was wet and miserable, as rain fell in sheets on the freshly plowed fields and turned the ground to a deep, sucking mud. In the French camp there was confidence and even celebration, for the nobility of France was certain that the morning would bring an easy slaughter of the ragged English. In the English camp, men knelt in the mud and made their peace, fully expecting to die. The French army was the pride of a kingdom, led by the constable, Charles d'Albret, and crowded with dukes, counts, and the greatest knights of the age, all hungry for glory. Their own king, Charles VI, was not among them, for he suffered from bouts of madness and could not command. In his place, proud lords jostled and argued for the honor of standing in the front rank. That pride would prove deadly. Henry's army was smaller, poorer, and very different in character. Perhaps 5 out of every 6 of his men were not knights at all, but archers, common men carrying the English longbow, a tall bow of yew that took a lifetime to master. Exactly how badly the English were outnumbered is still debated by historians to this day. Some old chronicles claim the French outnumbered them 4 or even 6 to 1, while modern study of the pay records suggests the gap was smaller, closer to 3 Frenchmen for every 2 Englishmen. Either way, the English were outnumbered, exhausted, and trapped with their backs to a long road home. But Henry chose his ground with great care. He placed his army at the narrowest point of the field, where thick woods pressed in on both sides. This funnel meant the French could not use their greater numbers to surround him. They would have to come straight at him, across the open mud, on a front only a few hundred yards wide. To break the dreaded French cavalry, Henry ordered his archers to plant sharpened wooden stakes in the ground before them, angled outward like a hedge of spears. For hours, the two armies simply stared at each other across the field, neither wishing to attack first, for to move forward meant crossing the deadly mud. At last, Henry took the gamble. He ordered his whole line to pick up, advance to within close bowshot of the enemy, and replant the stakes. It was a daring move that left his army exposed, but it worked. With taunts and a storm of arrows, the English goaded the proud French into attacking. Now the killing began. Thousands of arrows fell on the French like a steel rain, striking armor, horses, and flesh. Stung into action, the French mounted knights launched their charge, but the attack was an immediate disaster. The horses could not break through the hedge of stakes, and they could not escape around the sides because of the woods. Maddened by their wounds, the animals reared, threw their riders, and bolted back the way they had come, smashing into the very ranks of French foot soldiers who were only beginning to advance. Then came the heart of the French army, the dismounted men at arms, the armored elite advancing on foot. They were brave, disciplined, and confident. But between them and the English lay hundreds of yards of churned, sucking mud. Step by step in heavy plate armor, they struggled forward as the mud pulled at their feet and clung to their legs. Arrows hammered down on them the entire way, and by the time they reached the English line, the proud knights were already exhausted. And here, the trap closed. As the wide French line was squeezed into the narrow neck of the field, the men were forced together, tighter and tighter. The ranks behind kept pushing forward, driving the front ranks onto the English weapons and down into the mud, until soon the French were packed so closely that many could not even raise their arms to fight. Men lost their footing in the mire and fell, and the press behind trampled over them. The dead and the dying piled up, and still more were pushed on top, until the heaps of struggling bodies became a horror all their own. Now came the moment that truly decided everything. The English archers, who had been raining arrows from the flanks, either ran out of arrows or simply saw their chance. These lightly armored common men dropped their bows, snatched up hatchets, swords, mallets, and daggers, and threw themselves on the trapped French. Nimble and unburdened, they darted across the very mud that had swallowed the knights. The greatest warriors of France, the armored nobility, were now helpless, stuck fast and crushed together, and the yeomen of England fell upon them. This is the part of the story we usually forget. We remember Agincourt as a triumph of the longbow, and the longbow was indeed a terrible weapon. But the arrows alone did not win this battle. It was the narrow field, the deep mud, and the fatal overcrowding of the French that turned their own great strength into a death trap. In the end, the proud chivalry of France was not so much defeated as it was swallowed by the ground itself and finished at close quarters. But the day held one more grim turn. Thousands of French soldiers had been taken alive to be held for rich ransoms. Then a fresh alarm swept the field, a cry that the French were attacking again, and Henry looked back at the mass of prisoners behind his lines, who still outnumbered many of his weary men. Fearing the captives would snatch up fallen weapons and turn on him, Henry gave a brutal order to kill the prisoners. Many of his own knights refused, unwilling to slaughter helpless men and lose their ransoms, so the king set his archers to the work. How many died this way is unknown, and historians still argue bitterly over the decision. Some call it a war crime, others a cold necessity in a desperate hour. When the new threat melted away, Henry called the killing off. When the field finally fell silent, the scale of the French disaster was almost beyond belief. By most accounts, around 6,000 Frenchmen lay dead, among them the Constable d'Albret and a host of dukes, counts, and lords. An entire generation of French nobility had been wiped out in a single afternoon, while the English losses, by contrast, were astonishingly light. The records name only a few hundred English dead, including Edward, Duke of York. One small, sick, and starving army had destroyed the might of a kingdom. The news struck France like a thunderclap. Whole noble families had been ended in the male line, and the leadership of entire regions was simply gone. The bitter rivalry between the great French factions, already smoldering, now burst into open civil war, leaving the kingdom divided against itself just when it most needed to unite. Henry had not merely won a battle, he had broken the back of French power. In the years that followed, Henry pressed his advantage. He returned to France, conquered great stretches of the country, and in 1420 forced a treaty that recognized him as heir to the French throne itself. It seemed the impossible victory at Agincourt had changed the course of history forever. But fate is rarely so simple. Henry died young, only 7 years later, and within a generation a peasant girl named Joan of Arc would help rally France and turn the tide back. Almost everything England had won would in time be lost, and yet Agincourt never faded from memory. Almost 2 centuries later, The playwright William Shakespeare immortalized the battle in his play about Henry V. He gave the king a stirring speech before the fight, calling his men a band of brothers. But those ringing words were never actually spoken on that muddy field. They are Shakespeare's invention. Still, they captured something true about the legend, and they fixed Agincourt forever in memory as the ultimate triumph of the few against the many. Agincourt endures because it speaks to something we never tire of, the hope that courage and cunning can overcome overwhelming odds. But the real lesson of that field is harder and stranger. The mightiest army did not fall to a secret weapon or a stroke of genius. It fell to mud, to overconfidence, and to the simple, terrible geometry of too many men packed into too small a space. The age of the armored knight was not yet over, but on that day in 1415, the future cast a long shadow across a muddy field in France. For more of the battles that shaped the world, subscribe and stay with us.